First of all, thank you for taking the time to join us this evening for the Richmond Highway Funding Plan public meeting presentation. I am Mike Garcia. I'll be your facilitator this evening. This is the first of two public meetings with the other one being held tomorrow during lunchtime. Just to kind of set a little bit of expectations, tonight you are going to hear about the list of projects that we will use to determine the total amount that the funding plan will be based on. So you're going to hear the list. These projects were pulled from the comprehensive plan, and Zach will go into additional details during the presentation. There will be additional public meetings in the future that will go over the various types of funding options that could be used to create the funding portion of the funding plan. But first, like tonight, we have to determine the bucket of improvements, which is why we're here. With that said, I just want to get a few housekeeping out of the way so that we get the most out of the meeting. For those who are not familiar with Teams, we'll go over how to raise and lower your hand and ask questions during the first comment question session, which should probably be about 10 minutes into the presentation. Some teams look a little different for others, so we can help troubleshoot that on the side using the chat feature if you need some assistance. The chat is enabled, so please use it if you would like to have your question answered that way. Comments will be taken, but we won't address the comments from the chat. If a term is not clear, please use the chat feature, put it in there, and we'll try to see if we can kind of make it clear during the presentation. With that said, I would like to introduce the staff that are going to be doing the meeting, or they're running the meeting for you tonight. So Zach Cromall will be giving the presentation. He is our project manager. And then Tom Burke, also behind the scenes, will be assisting, and he's going to be kind of our host behind the scenes. So if you need any technical support, just go ahead and let him know. He'll also be the one that will be muting and unmuting you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Zach, and you can go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Mike. Are you guys seeing the presentation?
We're good.
Okay, great. So everybody, thank you for joining tonight for our first meeting on the Richmond Highway Transportation Funding Plan. So really, we want to start out by giving some background about where this project came from, what kind of has preceded it. So back in 2015, the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors authorized what has come to be known as the Embark Richmond Highway Plan Amendment. It ended up revising, updating plan guidance for the Richmond Highway, within the Richmond Highway Area Plan, both for transportation and land use. And so on the transportation side, it included things like bus rapid transit, BRT, along Richmond Highway, as well as active transportation improvements in the corridor. And as part of that plan amendment, which was approved in 2018, there was a follow-on motion to direct staff to develop a funding plan for the transportation infrastructure improvements recommended in that plan. And this, we're just putting the project webpage up at the beginning of the presentation in case people want to visit it, kind of open some of the projects, open some of the project reports and take a look on your own while we're going through the presentation or afterwards. We will show this at the end of the presentation as well, this webpage. So following that follow-on motion, staff has been working on a few things. First, identifying projects, vetting projects, and now trying to do stakeholder engagement to make sure that we have the correct project list. So as part of the project identification, we really started out with the Richmond Highway Area Plan. That's where most of these projects are coming from. So you'll see the graphic here may look familiar to people who are involved with the Embark Plan Amendment. This is the PennDOT Community Business Center and shows a number of the recommended improvements from the comprehensive plan. We also looked at the bicycle master plan, countywide trails plan, both of which have recommendations not just for this area, but for the whole county, to see if any of those were relevant. And lastly, we looked for neighborhoods in the immediate vicinity of those community business centers, or CBCs, and the immediate vicinity of the BRT stations, and looked for missing sidewalks, missing links. So as part of the project vetting, we had some work where there were unclear or conflicting recommendations to try to reconcile those, figure out really what was the intent of the plan, what are the preferred improvements. We also vetted projects to make sure that they were relevant to Embark and relevant to this area. And now we're at stakeholder engagement. So really what we're looking for is feedback from the general public on kind of the overall concept of this funding plan and individual projects. If there are things that we missed, projects that may not be desirable to have on the list or may be difficult to implement, that's all feedback that we want to hear at this stage. Also hoping to answer questions if there are any, and ultimately to get at a more final version of this project list with everything we want and only that. Okay, so the next step in this process would be to take that project list and actually develop a funding plan for it, to identify potential funding sources and come up with a mix of revenue for these projects. Ultimately, that would involve more community outreach and a board of supervisors action. And at that point, it would be time to implement the plan. That's something that we expect would be kind of a medium or long-term project, which would happen as the funding became available and as development comes to the corridor. Okay, so before we jump into the projects, just very quickly want to share some photos and descriptions of the most common facility types. So this is, hopefully this looks familiar, this is a 5-foot concrete sidewalk. This is really all over the county, all over the Richmond Highway corridor. And so when we're talking about missing sidewalks, adding sidewalk facilities, this is really what we mean. Okay. This is a shared use path, also called, a paved trail, a bike trail, anything like that. Again, the VDOT standard right now is for an asphalt facility that's 10 feet wide, and typically they don't have a striped center line, but this one does. Another facility type we're going to talk about are standard bike lanes. You can see this is, again, they're all over Fairfax County. They are a painted on-road facility. Typically, they're intended to give cyclists a designated place on the road so that they are not having to jockey with vehicles. And lastly, we're also going to end up talking about a grid of streets or grids of streets. Typically, what we mean by that is, kind of is an urban style facility. Yes, it is can be used by vehicles, but typically there's also a sidewalk, a trail, a bike lane, some combination of those for active transportation users. And it's also in a more urban context. You may notice that the building here is pretty close to the sidewalk, pretty close to the road. That's not necessarily typical development pattern for Fairfax County, but that is kind of the vision for the community business centers in the Richmond Highway Corridor. Okay, so now diving into the project list itself, we're going to start out with sidewalks. Okay, so hopefully this looks familiar. This is the North Gateway CBC right here. You can see Richmond Highway here, Fort Hunt Road here, and the Capitol Beltway somewhere up here. And so you'll see in red, I've identified some missing sidewalk facilities in the immediate vicinity of that community business center, facilities that if they were there would facilitate people getting from surrounding neighborhoods into the CBC. Okay, go on to the next one. So we're going north to south. So the next one is Huntington Transit Station area. Again, just to orient people, we've got North Kings Highway right here and the Huntington Metro parking lot right there. And so that is intended to be the kind of the first station, the furthest north station of the BRT system. And again, in red, there's some missing sidewalk links identified. Okay, and next is the PennDOT Community Business Center. Again, just to help people orient themselves, Richmond Highway is here, South Kings and North Kings Highway are here, and we've got kind of a similar situation, some missing sidewalk links right around that community business center. Next is Beacon Groveton Community Business Center. Again, Richmond Highway kind of going right through the middle. And some missing links right around there. Okay, next is Hybla Valley Gum Springs Community Business Center. This is a bit bigger scale, so it's a bit zoomed out. But again, here you can see Richmond Highway, Lockheed Boulevard, and Fordson to help people orient themselves. Okay, here is the South County Community Business Center. Again, Richmond Highway here, the Jerry Highland Government Center, formerly South County Government Center right here. And lastly, the Woodlawn Community Business Center. Richmond Highway here, and Sacramento and Cooper here. Okay, so we know that was a lot of information, a lot of maps. So we're going to take a break to field any comments or questions.
So this is Mike, and I just want to make sure that Zach could put a link in the beginning of the presentation that is basically how you all got access to the meeting tonight. From the project webpage, all of these project sheets are up there, so you're feel free to peruse them at any time after this meeting and kind of take an in-depth look. Zach will put his information at the end of the presentation, and you can go ahead and email him, call him, whatever communication best fits your needs, and we can kind of field any questions that way. So what this was about, Zach just showed you, was all the sidewalks that are meant to support the missing sidewalks are meant to support the CBCs from the Embark plan. So that's where this kind of gap kind of came in. So we wanted to kind of at least let you all know that this is the sidewalks portion of it. There'll be four other components or three other components that Zach will go through that'll talk to the other aspects that make up the totality of the bucket. And then from that, we'll start developing the funding plan options from there. So to raise your hand, there is, yes, go ahead, Pete. You can unmute
Yeah,
yourself.
one question, and Michael, you might have just kind of answered it there for me. You guys are also going to go over not just the sidewalk plan, but bicycle stuff and okay. So I guess I'll wait. Is that this meeting
Yep,
next? You're gonna okay.
yep,
I'll
yep.
wait for that.
We'll go through the rest. We'll take all aspects of it. So,
Okay.
yeah. So what the next Zach will walk through the grid of streets, the trails, and then the bike portion as well. So that'll be the next parts of it. Oh, so I wanted to say for anyone joining, if to raise your hand, there's a little hand raise guy. For most people, it's the top of your screen. For others, it could be at the bottom. It really just depends on what version of Teams you're running, or if you're kind of running a loaner version from Microsoft. That is one way to kind of raise your hand. That's actually so we can enable your microphone, then you can unmute yourself. If you like, you can also just put any sort of comment or question in the chat, and we can also pull it from there. So what I'll do is, and we're going to come back and kind of take all of them, go through all aspects at the conclusion of the presentation as well. So I'll go ahead and be quiet and let Zach move forward as not seeing anyone has raised their hand, and we can kind of keep moving forward. Okay, Zach.
Okay, then we will keep moving. So the next type of facility is the grid of streets that we mentioned. I do want to, before we dive into this, do want to mention these were, really developed as part of the Embark Plan Amendment with a lot of community participation. Obviously, they've been endorsed by the Board of Supervisors, so we don't anticipate these changing a lot, but we do want to track them. We do want to make sure that they get implemented, and so we're going to share them as part of this presentation. So once again, starting kind of going north to south, here we've got the North Gateway Community Business Center, Richmond Highway here, and the Beltway here. So you see a planned avenue type grid street, as well as a trail. And so it's worth noting that Fairfax County does expect, not just here, but in the other community business centers, does expect most of these facilities to be built through development. But they ended up on this list because we want to have funding and be able to implement any odd pieces that don't get built that way. But that is still the expectation. Okay, the next community business center is Pendaw. Again, we've got South Kings Highway, North Kings Highway, and this should look familiar to anybody who is involved with Embark. And Quanda Road over here. Next, the Beacon Groveton Community Business Center. Again, we've got Richmond Highway here, Beacon Hill Road here, and Southgate Drive here. So again, these grid streets, there are slightly different concepts, but again, for all of them, it's a kind of urban style and one that accommodates both vehicles and active transportation users. Here we've got Hybla Valley Gum Springs Community Business Center. Again, this one's kind of a bit zoomed out, a different scale. And lastly, Woodlawn Community Business Center. Richmond Highway here, and Sacramento and Cooper here. And it's also worth noting that some of these, including this facility, were included in the grid of streets, but they are actually trails. So not all of these lines indicate roads. Okay, and then we'll take another quick break.
All right. So again, if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand. As Zach mentioned, just to recap, it's expected that the development committee would build most of those grids of streets within each CBC, but the funding portion of this would pick up if one is enacted. It would help enable where links are unable to be completed by development community, or we find that maybe a particular link in the grid would be beneficial to the public as a whole, so we want to advance it. So that's kind of how this particular funding plan could help advance those particular grids of links that are unable to be built through redevelopment. With that, I don't see anything, so we'll just take a quick moment. And I'll also say that the grids of streets, as Zach has shown, they're pulled from a comprehensive plan. So if you want to kind of get a visual of what the plan potential is looking for, you can go in, and Zach will post a link for a resource at the conclusion of the presentation that will take you to the comprehensive plan and kind of show you what the cross section of a potential one of those grids might look like. It might be a local street, it might be an avenue. There's also different types of streets that are in there, so you can take a look and kind of match it up that way. All right, Zach, want to continue on?
Okay. All right. So we also want to highlight some standalone trail projects. Maybe not to the same degree, but like the grid of streets, these could be built largely or in part through development. But we anticipate that not all of them would be built that way. So we're just going to highlight the top 3, but there are actually 8 of these trail projects that you can find on the website. The first one is on South Kings Highway. The concept here actually has a shared use path on the south side and a standard concrete sidewalk on the north side. And this recommendation comes from the Richmond Highway Area Plan. And just to highlight it, Memorial Street is there, and Pickett Street on the edge of the community business center down there. Okay, the second trail is the Davis Street Arlington Drive connector. This, again, it's another common type of facility that you see in the county, kind of this cut through, if you will, trail that connects 2 roads that otherwise don't meet, provides an active transportation connection without extending the full road. This recommendation is in the bicycle master plan. And finally, the Pole Road Trail. And so this is a trail that actually does exist in some parts and is in good shape. In other parts, it doesn't exist or is in need of an upgrade. And this recommendation is coming from the countywide trails plan. Okay, and we'll go ahead and take another break.
So I'll just let everyone know that if there is of the list of 8, if there is one that you all want us to kind of pull up and look at in particular, Zach does have all of them ready to be queued up if need be. But that's kind of sometimes more judicious if you want to take a look at it on your own through the link provided earlier. If there are any comments or questions, again, use the chat feature. You can also raise your hand. So what we'll do is we'll move through the last segment here, and then we'll definitely, Zach will conclude it, and we'll be able to kind of go in and pull up any slide or any kind of project sheet that you want to look at in particular. All right, Zach.
Okay. And then lastly, we want to share a handful of these bike lane projects. So like before, we're just we're going to look at 3 of these for the sake of time, but there are more on the website. One thing worth noting with these bike lane projects in particular is that in some cases they could be built entirely or mostly within existing right-of-way, depending on what the community preference is. If there's a desire to preserve existing parking or something else that's currently using up the space on road, there could be a need for additional right-of-way. So there are some options within these. Okay, so the first one of these is Memorial Street. So again, we're showing a connection, a facility from South Kings Highway to the boundary of the Beacon Groveton Community Business Center. This recommendation is in the Richmond Highway Area Plan and the Bicycle Master Plan. This facility is on Arlington Drive. From the connection with Dart Drive down to looping around back to Richmond Highway. And this is a recommendation in the Richmond Highway Area Plan. And lastly, this bike lane is shown for Lukens Lane from Old Mill Road to the edge of the Community Business Center. And so unlike the previous 2, parts of Lukens Lane actually don't have curb and gutter, don't have sidewalks currently. So this project would add the bike lane, but also fill in those facilities. Okay.
All right, Zach. If there's any questions on those particular bike projects, if not, we will go ahead and go over the next steps so that we can take comments on all aspects of the presentation.
Okay. So we did want to share these additional resources. On top is the, project webpage. You can find all of the project sheets for all of the projects there. Also included the Richmond Highway Area Plan, which, like Mike mentioned, has more detailed information about the transportation recommendations in each of the CBCs. And the Bicycle Master Plan and Countywide Trails Plan, which both have, again, kind of countywide recommendations, but ones that are relevant to this effort. Okay, and so we do want to open it up for general questions on all of the projects. If you want to, if you have comments after this meeting, you can reach out by email, you can reach out by phone, you can comment directly on the project webpage, whatever's easiest, but we are looking for comments by June 16th, Friday.
All right. Go ahead, Peyton. And this is our comment question portion of the presentation. So again, if you have a comment, please either raise your hand and we'll enable your microphone, or go ahead and add it to the chat and we can go ahead and take the questions out of there. But Peyton, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to know a little bit more about the decision to make Fort Hunt Road as a sidewalk facility. That stretch of Fort Hunt Road, especially not going all the way down to Bellhaven. I'm curious about the history with that.
Zach, would you mind scrolling to the slide and we can adjust it from there?
Sure. Okay. So I will need to double check the project page on the website, but I believe that this line is actually indicating a shared use path, a paved trail, rather than a concrete sidewalk. So hopefully that addresses one half of the question. But the other half, for these missing links, we had an informal cutoff of a quarter mile around these community business centers. We really wanted to focus on those facilities that would be moving people to the community business centers. We didn't want them to be too far afield and kind of lose that relevance to the Richmond Highway corridor. And so that's why the cutoff was made where it was. If that's something that we need to reconsider, look at again, we can definitely do that.
Well, I'd say as you guys know, there's already a 4-foot cycle trail that was put in as part of an agreement to expand the country club in the, I believe, early 2000s, which is in fairly rough shape currently. Peter Vigliotti has told me that they'll be looking at repaving that around the summertime when VDOT comes in and repaves the road. And there's some interest as well as putting in some bike infrastructure, such as buffered bike lanes, at least on the uphill portion during VDOT's repaving season for that, which will help. But that's a very major cycling area. As you know, you can connect into Alexandria to, frankly, Maryland if you go across the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. And there's cyclists there all the time. And if you're saying it's going to be a mixed use path, that's great. Sounds like the 10-foot standard you mentioned. But I just wanted to make sure that everybody was like aware of that's really a cycling area. And sidewalks are great and certainly an improvement, but a multi-use path, if we're going to be putting in anything there, that would be something to look more closely at.
Definitely.
Thank you. Those are the types of questions or comments that we need so that we can adjust these project sheets to adjust the bucket of funding that we need to kind of go after for this. So we'll make any adjustments as needed and kind of go from there. But yes, appreciated. And then from anyone from the public as well, if there's any sort of questions about where these came from, obviously a lot of them are derived from the comprehensive plan. That's kind of our basis for having this, and a lot of what's put in the comprehensive plan is done through public input. So we're kind of taking that public input, putting these projects together, and then hoping to develop a funding plan for it. And then just to remind everyone, the next step for us is to evaluate these projects under a cost component of it, which will allow us to create like whatever amount the whole totality costs. And then from there, we can sort of look at various funding options that could help implement these projects over the course and life of the comprehensive plan. So it's not that we would do these immediately, all of them in the next 10 or 15 years. They would be funding plan to take time to develop enough money to kind of put these projects in. So it'll take time through that. In addition, these projects always kind of change a little bit as they go through additional evaluation and engineering. Utilities or other kind of drainage could change the project slightly and make them either vary one way or the other. So this is not at that level yet. That level would take place at the next point as these are start to go through preliminary engineering and design and construction. Zach, do you want to go back to the last slide and have your information up?
Sure.
And so what we'll do, we'll pause here for any sort of comments or questions that you all have. Again, Zach's contact information is there as well, and the project webpage is there that you can provide feedback. We also have another meeting to talk about the list of projects tomorrow at lunchtime. So if anyone is available who is unable to make this meeting, if you want to pass the word along, they have another opportunity for us to kind of be available. And we'll be available afterwards as well for any sort of additional meetings as needed, should the community request us to kind of come out and be able to kind of give them an idea of what these projects are. So that we're requesting any sort of feedback on this particular list of projects by June 16th, so about 3 weeks from now, and we will make any sort of adjustments as necessary to continue through the next stage of this particular effort. And I'll pause here for another minute. I'm okay sitting in silence, and we can kind of see if anybody else has any kind of comments. All right. I think we're in a good place. So what we'll do is we will post this presentation to the project website by either the end of the week or early or after Memorial Day holiday, and you all can access it from there. Thank you everyone for attending, and if you would like to have another round of this, tomorrow at lunchtime is our second meeting. Thank you everyone, and have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.